my computer. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Amanda Perez, and I'm with the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training here at the University of Oregon. I'm so happy you all made time in your day to fit us in. This is going to be a really great talk, and we're excited to have you here. I'm going to go through a couple of housekeeping things first, and then we'll do introductions and move forward. So housekeeping wise, and I know most of you have seen it because we just used it, but we've got a chat function at the bottom of the screen. We really would like your participation in this. So as you have questions, please drop them in there and we'll take time as appropriate to have Winston respond to you. And then also we'll have the Q&A there. So as you have thoughts, we would like to have them. We'll create multiple spaces in there for you to ask your questions. So please participate. That's what makes these webinars entertaining and meaningful and helpful. So we want to hear from you. If you do run into any problems, please email me directly. I'll put that into chat here in a moment, but my email is Pereza, P-E-R-E-Z-A, @Cibirt, CBIRT.org. That's the best place to reach me. I will also be monitoring my email throughout. So if you have questions, let me know. I did send out a number of handouts, so you should have 6 attachments in your email. If you do not get that, please email me and I will make sure that I send those to you. And then this is recorded. So we will have this ready and available for you to watch at a later date. If you would like to, we will be sending out evaluations following the webinar, and you will be able to download a certificate of attendance once you've completed that evaluation. So those are all my housekeeping things. If you have questions, please pop them in there. And so with that, so Dr. Cornwall is joining us today. He is the Civil Rights Education Specialist with the Oregon Department of Education. He's been doing this for 20 plus years. He is our expert and we love hearing from him. He'll be talking today about 504s and remote learning. So Dr. Cornwall, off to you.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here and thanks for everything that you're doing on behalf of students during these challenging times. I want to especially thank Melissa McCart and Amanda Perez and Cibirt as an organization. They've been tremendous educational and research leaders, not only within the state of Oregon, but their reach is regional and in some cases national. The other thing that these two women are doing is having an impact on the Oregon legislature and the types of offerings and supports we can provide for students with traumatic brain injury and concussions. I'm going to get into this right away. I want to echo what Amanda said about we're real interested in taking your questions and hearing from you and being interactive. I won't read this disclaimer, but I just want to make sure you know that it's there. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about definitions around 504 that are key. Students who are protected under 504, the first bullet, this is usually called the three-prong definition of section 504, has a physical or mental impairment, one prong, which substantially limits, and substantially limits is the second prong. And for educators, this is the prong that we really kind of manage and influence. We may receive information from a physician or another qualified medical provider about a student's circumstance. We're looking for substantial limitation and evidence of that circumstance in the educational setting or in an extracurricular program. One or more major life activities, that's a list that's provided in a 504 and ADA guidance. So when I think about students who experience traumatic brain injury and concussions, their conditions are considered impairments. Some of that information is in the DSM-5 and in other medical sources of information. The major life activities that are impacted are things like thinking, concentrating, reading, interacting with others, and taking care of oneself, among others. but those 5 are probably the ones that I see most commonly. If a student meets this definition, we're seeking to find a student meeting this definition of disability. If we believe the student meets this definition, we have to come, schools have to conduct a formal evaluation for eligibility. If we find the student is eligible, we create a 504 plan, which has a set of accommodations and related services to provide a free, appropriate public education. We have 2 other categories of students in Section 504. The second category is a student who has a record or history of such an impairment. So if we have a student who experiences concussion, the student has been receiving treatment for a while, the student is healing and is needing less accommodation or support, that student may not be on a 504 plan, but has a record or history. If the student were to have any type of kind of relapse of condition, having the record or history would expedite the students receiving services. We also have to look at students in the last bullet who are regarded as having such an impairment. So this is students and or staff or others who are regarding the student as having a brain injury or concussion. Again, these 2 cases do not require an evaluation or a 504 plan, but the students are still 504 protected. Sometimes you'll hear the term technically eligible for these students.
While we're working on that, I have a question for you from Eric, who wants to know if a 504 plan can be initiated in college or must it be started in high school?
504 plans can be initiated in college. They're a little bit different. In the elementary and secondary school, we have a child plan provision. So schools have to take affirmative steps to locate students. In the post-secondary environment, students are considered adults. So the students have to present themselves to the college, university, or post-secondary institution to receive services. In elementary and secondary, we're responsible for the evaluation. When you're in post-secondary, the student or person is responsible for providing that information to the college or to the school.
Thank you. And then Amber was wondering if you could explain more the circumstances behind why someone will be technically eligible without having an actual 504.
Okay, so the technically eligible person is not meeting that three-prong definition of being substantially limited at one time. Maybe an easier way to look at it is a student who had skin cancer, and the student has skin cancer. The student was substantially limited at the outset of the condition when they were receiving treatment and services and chemo. They've gone through the chemo, they've gone through the other types of treatment. Um, they've recovered to an extent that they can participate fully in their education. And so, because they're not substantially limited anymore, they wouldn't be 504 plan eligible. But because they have a record and a history of an impairment, and they have a condition that may reoccur, we want to make sure that we record them as having a record or history and be able to respond to their needs immediately. Is extended time. And we encourage people to think of extended time as extended deadline. So students may receive additional time for homework assignments, term papers, or even tests. One of the things we encourage school teams to do is to be very specific about the amount of extended time to inform the parent and the students and to state specific courses where the extended time or extended deadline can be used. This should also be an interactive process where the parent and student are communicating if the extended time is suitable and if any alterations may need to be made, especially in the remote learning environment. Um, Students who may be on health plans, and some of our students um, with TBI, or especially the students with concussions, are likely to be on a health plan that has information about how much time the student can study, maybe how much time the student should be accessing online services and other accommodations. Um, those plans should be attached to a 504 plan. And what's really important is being very specific and clear about the responsibilities of everyone who has to implement that plan. I'll skip bathroom breaks right now. Um, when we look at testing, this is similar. If we're going to make any sort of adaptation to testing, we need to be fairly specific about what we're going to do, um, considering the location, the environment, again, merging that with extended time or deadline, and any breaks a student may receive. What's occurring in some schools, even though there's remote learning, is there are times when students who need accommodations are brought into the building for testing, and schools can prioritize that as we look, at least in Oregon, as of returning to school. And I know we have a tentative date for that of February 15th. It's likely that elementary school students will return first, um, but students on 504 or IEP plans can also receive priority in returning to school. Reteaching difficult concepts. Again, we want to be specific. Um, Ideally, reteaching concepts should be provided in a one-on-one environment. So there's detailed explanation and the instructor and or student can check for understanding. In the remote environment, a number of school staff are offering office hours. So this would be the place to obtain those services. If they're not offering office hours, it's still a good idea to request specific one-on-one time with the instructor. Parent contact systems. And this one is interesting because when the students are in person, it would be the teacher who would be contacting the parent to let the parent know how the student is doing in a certain area of their academic experience or school experience. This may end up being parent or student contacting teachers or other school staff to let them know how the student is progressing in school and what needs the student may have. We talked about extended time and extended deadline. Here's another opportunity to assist students called Credit for Proficiency, where we're not shortening schoolwork or tests, but we're focusing on the student's ability to demonstrate the skill that's being learned. And the question staff can ask, and this is especially helpful um, for students with TBI or concussions, or students who may have shortened instructional periods due to their condition, is can the students demonstrate the skill being learned um, in a shorter set of work examples? So the two examples we provided here is kind of the test is for 50 math problems, 50 quadratic equations to be solved. Can our student who has the condition complete 30 of those questions at a 90-degree or another accuracy level? And does that demonstrate the skill? I'm a former language arts teacher, and so 5-paragraph persuasive essays or 5-paragraph essays were a standard. If we're evaluating the student's ability to write 5 full paragraphs, then we couldn't shorten that assignment. We'd really focus on providing extended time. However, if the skill being evaluated is paragraph construction, we may be able to do that in writing a smaller number of paragraphs, between 1 and 3. When I speak with language arts teachers in Oregon, and I ask them how many paragraphs they need to judge if a student is proficient at paragraph construction, about 60% of the teachers say 1 paragraph, another 10 to 15% say 2 paragraphs, and then the remaining 10% say 3 paragraphs. So it's actually a small amount of teachers who may require the entire assignment if the assignment is looking at a skill that can be demonstrated in a subset. I want to shift a little bit and talk about the rights of students on 504 and IEP plans during COVID. And so remember, a few minutes ago, I said that 504, even during COVID and the distance learning period, is in full effect. And as long as a student is receiving instruction, they're entitled to 504 or IEP services. This is the slide that basically confirms that if a student doesn't receive services after an extended period of time, then the IEP team or 504 team has to make an individualized determination as to whether or not the student needs compensatory services. And those compensatory services are there to do 2 things: to make up for any accommodations that are on the existing plan that haven't been provided, or to make up for any skills that may have been lost in the time that we were engaged in remote or distance learning. That guidance was expanded in September. This slide just speaks to when schools when schools begin to return students. Again, most schools will return a subset of students. At least in Oregon, what we're seeing is pre-K and K through 3 students returning, but there are also opportunities for schools to prioritize 504 or IEP or students with disabilities return to school, since in-person environments are usually better for this group of students. This slide just speaks to the piece around all of the 504 services being offered and 504 being in effect. So schools are required to conduct evaluations and reevaluations under 504. A conversation that Melissa and Amanda and I had earlier this week involved students who may experience traumatic brain injury or concussions since we've been involved in remote learning. And if those students have had those experiences, the evaluation for 504 can begin even though the student is attending school remotely. 504 evaluations, wherever possible, can be conducted online. And information can be provided to the school electronically. We can use Zoom meetings or other virtual environments to actually hold 504 team meetings or 504 evaluations. Of concern with students is whether or not schools are still looking at harassment complaints that are made under 504 or IEPs for students with disabilities, as well as Title VI, which covers race, color, and national origin, or Title IX, which covers sex, sexual orientation, gender identity. And the key piece is absolutely, as long as school is in session, all civil rights laws apply. And so If students report issues of harassment online or otherwise in their educational experience, we have a duty to respond to those. Let's shift now and spend some time talking about compensatory services and some examples where compensatory services um, should and shouldn't be provided based on school interaction. So this slide defines compensatory services, and it states that compensatory education is an appropriate means for providing that free, appropriate public education to a student with disabilities who's been previously denied FAPE. All right. So while it's not the fault of the school that services aren't provided during the COVID period, um, it's really clear that services, wherever possible, should be provided. And if the student doesn't receive those services, then an evaluation has to take place when students return to no later than when students return to school. We've encouraged Oregon 504 case managers and building coordinators to begin those evaluations while the students are participating in remote learning, and if possible, begin to offer the compensatory services during remote learning. So that can be done, and that's an opportunity to seek. It must definitely be done once the students return to the in-person environment. We have to look at some of the issues that come up. One set of issues would be parents and students who fail to take advantage of online services, and whether that decision should impact the amount of compensatory services that are provided. And federal courts have an opinion. We'll look at a couple of cases in just a few minutes. Actually, we'll look at a case right now. Here's one. So a middle school IEP, so this is a case from El Paso County in Texas. A complaint was made to the Texas Educational Agency. And this involves a middle school IEP student who did not receive all of the reduced services that was planned for the period of the COVID closure. One service was vision instruction from the vision instruction teacher, weekly instruction. The teacher contacted the parents about providing these services through WebEx, an online environment, and asked the family to indicate when the student would be available to receive the services. The parents didn't respond. The vision instruction teacher sent out one more email that was just a prompt about the first email, but didn't offer any services or ideas. The parents did not respond, so the teacher let the matter go. And what the Texas Educational Agency concluded was that even though the parents didn't respond in this circumstance, because the student missed services, the student was entitled um, to, it's called here, it says an hour by hour award of compensatory services, but the student was entitled to all of the services that the student would have received based on the 504 plan accommodation. This speaks to our role as educators in following up when parents do not respond to communications about online services. We have to make multiple attempts to contact parents. During those attempts, we have to provide suggestions on how to motivate, and examples would be how to motivate students, set up work area, structure an online school day, um, other strategies. In the case of the vision instruction, really encouraging the family and student to set some time ahead to see if those services, to receive those services online and see if the service delivery is successful. All right. A lot of these cases are Some of these cases are looked at in federal courts, and federal courts consider if a parent's conduct in refusing services is relevant during the compensatory services. In the last case, we just saw an example um, that the parents' perceived lack of response did not affect the amount of compensatory services we received. Um, and that was a case from 2020. Here is an older case, um, but it involves the Ninth Circuit Court. The Ninth Circuit Court is important to us in Oregon because Oregon is governed by the Ninth Circuit Court. So decisions that were made, such as this one in Washington State, would likely apply in Oregon. This is kind of a different circumstance. It takes a parent's rejection of services to another extreme. So in this case, the parent and students sought compensatory services, but because the parent had rejected the eligibility offer of the school, refused to allow a behavior specialist to evaluate the student, rejected the offer of compensatory services in 2 years, um, those refusals influenced the compensatory services calculation. So one of the things that we can do is if parents are feeling challenged or parents are uncomfortable communicating with the school environment, that we can provide assistance in different avenues for that interaction to make sure that students can take advantage of services wherever possible. Here's another case out of Nebraska, and one that was handled by the Federal Office for Civil Rights in 2020. This student's 504 plan allowed for late assignments and required teachers to contact the parent if the assignments were missing. Given the confusion of COVID-19 at the outset, the teachers failed to call the parent about the missing work and gave consequences to the student. The parent complained to the counselor. The counselor responded promptly to remind the teachers of the 504 plan. The principal met with those teachers to kind of reinforce the email. This situation repeated itself again, but the key piece was that the school staff responded very quickly to the issue. When the parent was asked if the student experienced any loss or if this issue had an impact on the student's grade, the parent wasn't sure. And there's some statement in this where the parent didn't believe so. So one of the keys around 504 compensatory services is looking to see if the student experienced a meaningful adverse impact that deprived the student of an educational opportunity. Because the principal and the counselor responded very quickly to providing these services for students, the lapse in not providing the services didn't appear to deny the student's free appropriate public education. One of the things schools have to acknowledge during the remote learning period is certain students with certain types of conditions. Here are the examples of behavioral issues, ADHD, off-task behavior, multiple disabilities. I believe that traumatic brain injury and concussion are among these services or among these conditions where students may be challenged in working in the online environment because of the effect of their condition or their impairment on their ability to access their online education. And so schools knowing this and staff knowing this need to make adjustments. This slide is a reminder that even though we're in a remote learning environment, the needs of the 504 students receiving services at home must still be met as adequately as the needs of their non-disabled peers. That's the average student. So um, this is where we're encouraging schools to make changes to 504 plans. If the in-school plan is not working, make those changes to the 504 plan um, as it applies to the remote learning or the home environment or the online environment. Here's another case we're looking at from 2020, um, where the student had an accommodation to receive required speech therapy services of 120 minutes a month, but some of those dates fell on school holidays or the school student was absent for other dates, and the students being absent, students' absences were excused. The Office for Civil Rights said in this circumstance that even though the student was absent or the service was to be provided on a district holiday, it doesn't release the district from the obligation of providing the full service. This is important, I think, not only in this example, but for students who have conditions where the condition may increase their absences, um, that as long as we're following the process, school or district process for excused absences, then those services should still be provided. As we look at returning to schools or looking at when compensatory services can be provided, um, there are several options for schools as well as students and parents. Um, Compensatory services are frequently offered during summers. In some cases, families during the intersession, so during the winter recess or during the spring recess, may request those services. After school is another area for when services can be provided. If there are existing sessions that are scheduled, one of the things that may be considered is increasing the scheduled session time or increasing the number of sessions that are provided on a weekly basis or whatever interval is being used. The ideal piece is probably some combination of these options. The decision for what compensatory services should be awarded should be made by the 504 or IEP team. The 504 team has to have individuals on the evaluation team that are knowledgeable about the student, knowledgeable about the meaning of the evaluative criteria, and knowledgeable about the placement options. So those students ideally know the student best. One omission I made, the parent is a member of the 504 team. So this provides the parent an opportunity to provide input as the compensatory services are being followed. Last slide, and then we'll can open up for questions. Um, Schools must document the compensatory services offered to the family and need to list these 5 things. They have to be very specific about the type of compensatory services that are offered, the amount of services, the staff that will provide those services, the location for the service, particularly important during remote learning, if we're going to offer services online or if we're going to offer services in the building. And then lastly, the schedule for providing those services. So I'd like to stop here. I appreciate everybody's patience and would like to hear from some of you, um, your response to this information or us responding to the questions or concerns that you may have. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Winston. It's always super valuable information. I know it's probably going to take folks a couple of minutes to compose their questions there, but I did have one for you a little ways back just before we ran into some technical difficulties, if you would like to address that one.
Please.
Okay, so this one says, can we write a 504 for a student where there's no documentation provided regarding a disability, just on hearsay? What types of documentation would qualify a student for a 504?
So, so we do not need a medical evaluation to write a 504 plan for a student. And the Federal Office for Civil Rights is really clear on this. If we insist on medical documentation and the parent or guardian is unwilling or unable to obtain it, since the evaluation is supposed to be free and appropriate, then the school district would have the responsibility. What the language says in the guidelines is the school district must assist the family in providing that information. What courts and the OCR have pretty much said is that if you require a formal medical evaluation, you have to pay for it. The school district would have to pay for it. So when we begin to look at evaluation information, we're beginning with reviewing the student's cumulative file. We're looking at any state assessments the students may take. Again, looking to evaluate what's the student's performance during the state assessment as compared to the average student in the state that you're in. So looking for that difference. Any other type of assessment or achievement test the student takes. Something that's really important is teacher recommendations. So the parent may allege that the student experiences certain conditions. If the teacher is seeing those conditions in the classroom environment or in the remote learning environment, that information matters from teachers. The information the parents provide matters. If the only challenge comes is if the school is not seeing what the parent and or students see at home, because the schools can make judgments on what's seen in the school environment. The one exception to that circumstance um, are for the conditions of attention deficit disorder, ADD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. In those circumstances, what the parent observes around his or her students' perceived or actual signs of ADHD matters, and that's considered one data point. If the school corroborates with that, that's a second data point. If the parent provides a medical information, that in that case, the burden of proof would be on the school. So we're also looking for information on the student's physical or mental or emotional condition, any social or cultural background items, and then maybe lastly, um, looking at adaptive behavior and the student's capacity to interact with others. So Amanda, that's where we would start with that case. But again, to review, a team does not need a medical diagnosis to initiate a 504 evaluation or to write a 504 plan, especially when the condition is evident to staff in the school environment.
Great, thank you. And I think that evaluation is a really important component there too, of what they were asking. So we have a couple more questions that came in. One of them was, what staff usually provide compensatory services?
It would probably depend upon the nature of the services. So specialists may provide certain types of services if it's speech pathology, if it's vision instruction, those may be provided by specialists. In other cases, it may be some faculty and staff. So one of the things that is appeared to be the case nationwide is that the subject where we have an idea that students are experiencing loss is math instruction or mathematics. So so those compensatory services may be provided by school math teachers, perhaps in an after-school environment, or may be provided by math teachers and tutors in an increased session environment or in a summer session.
Thank you. Donna is mentioning, I think, a particular student here. No names though. So she says, I have one that almost never attends in the Google Meets. We are in contact with parent by phone and email often. Is there anything else we can do to support this student to get the student back on track? We hope to open back up to students January 26th. We are consistently documenting.
Okay. So we appreciate the efforts that have been made to contact the parent. We have to continue attempting to contact the parent on a regular basis and to make sure that we offer suggestions. Once school opens up, I believe you said in this circumstance on the 26th, it would be important to meet as soon as possible with the student and parent, or if the student is on a plan, to convene the team to begin to look at the circumstances that impacted the student while the student was away and how the team can help the student respond and make up that work now that the student is back in school.
Great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions in this chat right now. So I think we've probably gone through those questions. If you guys do have other questions coming in, go ahead and type them in while we're chatting here for the last couple of minutes. And then if you do run into further questions as you're pondering this, you're more than welcome to contact me or Winston. Do you have a slide with your contact information as well?
I do. Should be right here. So I want to echo
Okay.
that. Please feel free to contact me anytime.
Okay, so we know these are dynamic moments in time, and there's definitely going to be questions that come out of this, especially as kids are getting back into school, and so it's very timely having you here and talking with folks. Looks like we did get one more question while we were chatting. So this is from Lisa. I apologize if I butcher this. It's LIPI/hybrid models. I'm not sure what that is. Does if parents decline sending their kids to school, will comp services still be warranted?
So I would say it's going to be,
Got it.
it's going to depend on a case by case assessment. So if the school offers the option for the parent for hybrid services, and I'm thinking of hybrid services as some services in school and some services online or remotely. If the school offers the parent the option and the parent chooses the remote environment, it's important for the school to communicate if the student is having any challenges in the remote environment, that the better placement for the school may be in person, and the school should make an offer of in-person services to the parent and find out what types of objections the parent has to returning the student to school and determining if the school can mitigate any of those. It's very possible that the student would receive some compensatory services, but the student may not receive all of the services that are being sought if the school makes an offer for live services once school is in session. So it's going to depend case by case, but the opportunity to provide those services in person, if the student isn't having success online, has some bearing on whether or not the student would receive a full set of compensatory services.
Thank you. And Douglas Herman is wondering if compensatory service guidance pertains to IEPs as well.
Yes, it does. So it pertains to all students with disabilities that have plans. Um, so it's both IEP students and 504 students. Compensatory services is much more common in the IEP environment. So even pre-COVID, there are times that IEP teams have provided compensatory services to students who've either missed extended time or the services were indicated on the plan, but may not have been offered to the amount and the frequency um, that the student needed, or sometimes even when the services had been provided as written in the plan, but the services haven't been fully effective for the students. So, but yes, definitely both IEP and 504 service students would be eligible for compensatory services.
Okay, well, I think we are officially at the end of our questions. Winston, thank you so much for taking the time to go through those. I so appreciate how dynamic you make these webinars, and hopefully we'll get to have you in person again at some point.
I appreciate it. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties and then rushing through the presentation. So I would really, Amanda and Melissa, thank you for everything that you do, and would want to encourage the audience to continue to contact us as issues or concerns arise.
Okay, thank you so
Thank,
much.
thank you, Winston.
My pleasure.
Bye.